We are rolling.
All right. So before all of this happened, you were pregnant, married, happy. Just talk to me about that time in your life.
Hey, do me a favor, Chris. Can you sit right there so that it's less stark of an angle for her to be looking?
Sure. Right. So
Like, I mean, I'm talking right here where your face is.
Okay.
There we go.
Oh, don't. Yeah, I was about to say you're going to fall backwards.
Have a seat.
Okay.
And look at Chris. And, oh, there we go.
You look
now
really comfortable.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just keep that smile and start talking about a happy time in your life. When you were pregnant and before all this happened, how was your life going?
Before I was pregnant with Callaway, I led a very normal, healthy life. Really had no health problems. Active, generally.
It's fine. It's fine.
What do I say? Oh my gosh, this is awful. We're gonna leave because we're like, it's just more people listening. That's probably making you awkward anyway. So we're gonna go. Are you good? Yeah, I'm good. They're got you under control. I just want to think, I'm like, the more people here probably, the more awkward it is. Yeah. I don't know, like, do I say...
You know, I was really excited to be pregnant. We wanted to have a child for a while. You know, the pregnancy was going okay. We were hoping for a girl. I don't know, stuff like that. Just to give the audience a sense of where you were in your life. Does that make sense?
So do I talk about before getting pregnant with Callie, or I was pregnant with Callie and talk about...
Whichever one you want to.
I mean, just say Ben and I have been married for a few years, and you know, have been trying for a baby, and we were so excited to be pregnant, and looking forward to her arrival. And I mean, I think you could just, I think
the way I sort of do this is in 3 acts. So you sort of introduce yourself and tell how your life was going, and then we talk about what happened to you and this devastating thing, and then we talk about the resolution and how your life is now and how the Heart Association has helped you.
Okay.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right.
And nothing you say is wrong, okay? Just say whatever's on your
they're
heart.
really good at editing too.
Oh, let's hope
Just
so.
talk like you did to us that day in the office.
I know,
Because
it's
that
like-
day, I felt like you really told your story. Like the
Yeah.
first day, the 3 of us met. I mean, you told us, but it was just real. Like
Yeah.
I felt that day you really got into the
And I'll-
emotion of how it felt and what you thought and all of that.
And I'm just asking questions just to get you going.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about other stuff, talk about other stuff. And we'll just edit around whatever we need. Okay?
Okay.
Do you want me to stay or are you good?
No, I mean, if y'all are whatever y'all want to do, it doesn't matter.
I just don't want to make you awkward.
It was more of like, I just got like mind blocked, like, okay, where does this go? I just got to, there was nowhere to go from there. It was not right. Okay.
So do you want to talk some more about that, or did you want to start over?
I'll start over.
Okay.
Okay. Start over, which part?
Just where you were in your life during that time, before all this happened.
Ben, when did we move back to Jackson?
October of 2012.
Okay. I'll start from that point because that's when we kind of started thinking about having a baby.
Okay.
Okay. In October of 2012, Ben and I decided, we were previously living in Memphis, we decided to move back to Jackson and potentially start a family. We were so excited. It was something we had always wanted to do. It was kind of that next milestone in our marriage. And when we found out we were expecting it was a few years later, that makes no sense.
No, you were doing well.
Yeah,
Really
you're
good.
doing fine. And remember, we're going to edit this.
Don't think about it. Just
So,
talk to us.
Yeah. Honestly, treat this like a conversation.
Okay.
You're talking
Not an
about
interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben and I, when we first got married, lived in Memphis, Tennessee. We decided in October of 2012 to move back home to Jackson to be with his closer to family and potentially start a new family. And we're really excited about the possibility of expanding our family with a little baby. And a few years later, we found out we were expecting a little girl born.
That's fine. That's fine.
Do you want me to start over? Because I've stumbled.
No.
No.
How did you feel when you found out you were pregnant?
Oh my goodness. We had prayed hard and long for a baby. And the moment we found out, it was one of the best moments, I think, in our lives. You always grow up wanting to have a family. Once you get married, it's one of those things everybody prays for and hopes for. And so when you're blessed with the exciting news of expecting, your whole outlook on life changes. It's not just about you and your husband. It's about this new life that you're bringing into the world. And we were absolutely over the moon.
Perfect.
Sounds so
Perfect.
cheesy.
No, it's perfect.
Over the moon? That's so stupid.
Yeah, you need to stop thinking about yourself, thinking about this. Just, I mean, seriously, whatever you're saying is acceptable because it's true.
Yeah.
And it's your personality.
You're doing it really well.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I remember in the pre-interview I was talking. I mean, we had a really hard time getting pregnant with Callaway. So when we found out, I can't find the word. It was
If you were telling
amazing.
someone about it, like if you were just saying, telling one of them your story over cocktails, what would you say? If you have to think about it, it's wrong. Just tell them your story.
And you really just said it. You know,
Okay.
we had been trying for a while, you know. All this has been rolling the whole time you've been talking. So we got it.
Okay.
So just kind of just forget about that.
Okay.
So tell me about your health, you know, during this time. You were, you know, in great shape. You don't look like you have an ounce of fat on you. You know, just talk about kind of where you thought you were.
Going into pregnancy, even before I was pregnant, I was led a very healthy, normal life. I really had no health problems. Rarely had to go to the doctor, you know, besides your common cold and things like that. I had never had anything, I had never had any life-changing medical issues that I had to deal with up until this point. I was active, relatively in shape. That makes no sense.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Up until, hold on. Mind block.
It's fine. I think we have what we need anyway. So just talk a little bit about.
What did I say? Is there something I'm missing from the thing? From last time we talked?
I'm just trying to give the audience a sense of you were a normal, what you'd expect, because you're in your 20s, right? During that time, 20-something-year-old who just got pregnant. You were happy.
How old was I when I got pregnant? 2014. Okay. I was, you know, going into pregnancy, I was a normal 27-year-old woman who had no health problems up until that point. Really nothing to give you any reason to expect I would, within the year, have major issues that would come to surprise anybody.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I would mention, one thing we talked about, because you said it with both of us, was about how all you ever saw was your OBGYN. I mean, you would just have your yearly checkup once a year. You didn't really even have a primary care
that's
physician.
true.
Remember we talked about that?
Yeah.
Because that was one of the things we said is so important at the end,
Yeah.
So I think you could mention, I heard you say like a common cold. I mean, I would see my OBGYN once a year for my yearly checkup, and that was good. And
Okay.
I didn't even really have a primary care doctor.
Okay.
At this point, I just remember that being important.
Yeah.
And tie it back together at the end.
Okay. Going into pregnancy, I was your typical 27-year-old woman. I would see my OB for my yearly checkups once a year. Never really had any issues that needed to be, taken care of. And up until I was trying to lead into the I'm going to just start over. Okay. Going into my pregnancy, I was a typical 27-year-old woman. I would, go in for my yearly checkups with my OBGYN, but other than that, had no real reason to go see any other doctors. I was relatively healthy, was active, and really up until a year or so later when I had my heart scare, I was given no other reason to think that anything was going wrong in my body. I'm trying to say, it eventually surprised everybody. How do I say that? Okay. Going into my pregnancy, I was your typical 27-year-old female who never really went to the doctor except for my yearly checkup with my OBGYN. I was relatively healthy, active, had no health problems, and really was given no reason to expect anything like this to happen to me a year or so later. I think it really shocked me and shocked everybody else that I was in this position. The position makes sense?
Okay. So why don't you tell us when you first started noticing something was not right?
Looking back, I, as a female, I think you have symptoms but don't want to admit their symptoms. I'm the type of person that when I have the flu and I'm running a fever, I go to the doctor and then the fever's gone. What are you talking about? You don't feel well, you have no fever, you're fine, go back home. One of those things where it's like, I'm going to wait to go to the doctor because I don't want to be dramatic. I don't want to cry wolf when nothing's wrong. I'll just give it a few more days. And looking back on my pregnancy, I noticed there's a point in time at the end of my pregnancy where I was feeling bad, but it's my first time to be pregnant, to be 36, 37, 38 weeks pregnant. I thought it was normal to be out of breath, generally speaking, just not being able to do the things I would normally do throughout the day. I remember my husband gave me, surprised me with a massage. It was towards the last month or so of my pregnancy, and I remember being in the massage room and asking them, they put you in an incline, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm still sitting up and I cannot breathe. This doesn't feel right. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I'm really pregnant. This is not fun. And I've never not liked a massage before. Who doesn't like a massage? And I just remember wanting to run out of that room and leave. I could not breathe. I felt horrible. And I really didn't think much about it after that. I just thought, it's pregnancy. I'm not going to freak out. This will be over with in a few weeks, hopefully, and we'll be holding a baby girl, and it's not going to be an issue. Don't even know that I ever even really told anyone about it. it's something now that I look back on and think, that wasn't normal. So fast forward, I have our perfectly healthy baby girl, Callaway, and after my postpartum period, the shortness of breath continued. I remember at night I'd kind of ask Ben, like, I never have had heartburn really before. And so I kept asking Ben, like, do you get heartburn kind of in your back? I'm feeling something when I'm sitting straight up. I'm still feeling this kind of pain in my back and my shoulder blades. Do you get heartburn back there? And he was like, it's usually in your, I don't know what that would be. We kind of ignored it, thinking you just had a baby. Of course, you're not going to feel that great. And things progressively got worse over the next few months. Things like folding laundry, I kind of found myself kind of huffing and puffing and think, God, am I this out of shape? Like, this is sad. Maybe I need to go get back in the gym. I remember texting the lady I worked out with being like, I am so out of shape. I'm getting winded walking into the building to do, I'm so out of shape. I'm getting winded walking into the building and it just doesn't feel right. I feel like I need to maybe get back into my workout routine and get myself back into
Shape?
But I feel like I had just said shape. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm going in a circle.
One thing, remember, we're going to edit all of this
Yeah.
now. So it's okay even to use the same word over and over
Yeah,
again.
I know.
Because it'll only appear
This
once.
is harder than it looks, I will say.
You're doing good though.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
are doing good. I think
Okay.
you hit a rhythm there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where I was going at the other meeting. Anyways, I would, there were small things I was noticing at home, like putting her car seat in the car. I would kind of be short of breath, and folding laundry, I'd be short of breath. It was certain things that in my mind I would note, but wouldn't necessarily say out loud to Ben. It was something I kept brushing off. I just had a baby. In the postpartum period, your body is adjusting to life back to its normal self without something inside of, whatever, a baby inside of you. And there came to a point where I remember emailing the lady I worked out with previous to having Callaway and said, gosh, I'm so out of shape. I really feel like I need to get back in the gym. And get myself back to where I can really feel good about myself. And, I've got a baby to take care of. I've got to get back and not, I'm out of breath doing the smallest little task. And so I guess in a way I was a little bit naive. Thought it was just the normal wear and tear of having a baby and getting yourself back into, getting yourself back. Getting yourself back.
That's fine. That's fine.
I keep getting stuck there. Okay. After that, I still don't know that I really got back in the gym, even after I sent the email. I think I just kind of made me feel better for a minute that I was going to try to get back in shape. The symptoms kept kind of getting worse, and I started kind of more vocally talking to Ben about it, being like, I think the trend was I'm out of shape. How in the world do you get, yourself from point A to this point? And he's like, you had a baby. That's not a minor task on your body. It's going to take some time to get yourself back up to your normal self, to where you're feeling like yourself. And question, are we going to mention me messaging my OB and her not?
I don't know, that worries me because I don't want to ever back.
I don't think I
So where do I go from there?
Well, I'm going to ask you a couple other questions.
Because it went from there to, I kind of started mentioning it to my mom. Then I went home for Amber's party, and that's when it kind of came to a head.
Can we take a step back though?
Yeah.
And just because I want the audience to get to know you just a little bit more and what you were experiencing, why don't you just talk for just a second about what it was like to see Callaway for the first time? Talk about that experience of having this child that you'd wanted for so long.
Oh my gosh. Getting to hold Callaway for the first time was a moment I don't think any mom will forget. For us, we had prayed for a long time for this baby. And to hear her cry for the first time and to hold her in my arms, it was truly incredible. It was one of the best feelings in the world. I don't like that. I don't like best feelings in the world.
Sounded wonderful.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
I think the first time you ever hold your firstborn child in your arms, your life changes instantly. From that point forward, it's not about you. It's not about your husband. That sounds so bad. From that point forward, life is more than just about you and your husband. It's about this new life you brought into the world. And we were just so grateful to finally be holding our baby girl in our arms. It was something that we had hoped and prayed for a very long time. And to be blessed with a perfectly healthy, full-term baby girl was pretty awesome.
It's great. It's great. You need to take a second?
Maybe.
You want some water?
Sure. I also need to go. I'm going to go to the bathroom real fast.
Here, we got one that's
Am I going to mess up the whole lighting thing?
Sort of talk a little bit more about kind of the specific symptoms that you were having.
Okay.
And then sort of your journey about trying to get somebody to believe you or to...
Yeah, y'all are going to have to kind of guide me on that because I don't want to say something wrong
Right.
that's going to offend, like if Dr. Reeves is there.
Yeah. And you may just want to say something along the lines of, because you talked to your mom, your dad, and your gynecologist, you know,
And for them, there was, I mean, is it bad of me? I don't know why it would be offensive for me to say. My whole life I've been healthy. There's been no issues. Why would they think this 27-year-old girl has a
right,
90%
right.
blocked?
Yeah, and you know, you could just say maybe, you know, I talked to my own doctor about it, and
So then it's not just...
yeah, and just say something like that. And you don't have to go into detail. You can just say, because what did she say? Do you remember?
She just kind of told me to go see. It wasn't really I was asking her opinion. I phrased it like, what's a general doctor's that you recommend? Maybe I need to go see somebody if it
Or
doesn't
you
get
can just-
better.
Yeah, and you can just say that. You know, I talked to...
But still ignored the I guess with her, I more phrased it like, I'm having these weird symptoms. In my mind, didn't want to believe something was wrong. I asked her for a general practitioner's, a reference to a general practitioner, but never took myself seriously and actually went to the, I didn't,
Yeah, I think that's good right there.
something like that. Just remind me
Yeah.
to say that. Can someone check my hair?
Yeah.
I can't see. I don't know.
Oh, hang on, there's one little piece.
Right there.
Hang on, it's like one there. Wait, hold on.
I just messed up again.
It's okay. It's just one little like flyaway.
I think that's better. That's good.
Okay, ready? So, you were experiencing, I want you to repeat the symptoms to me, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding. You were experiencing shortness of breath and back pain. Were you experiencing the burning in the throat at this period point, or was that a little bit later?
The symptoms progressively started getting worse. I was having more shortness of breath, even when I wasn't exerting much energy. So, the symptoms were getting progressively worse kind of as the months went on. The more I ignored it, the more it kind of reared its head, I guess, so to speak. The shortness of breath got worse. It was kind of happening at rest, which should have been my first little tip-off that something was wrong. Again, ignored it. That's kind of the common theme throughout these months, is that I ignored it. You know, I think in the back of my mind I knew something wasn't quite right, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to cry wolf and everything be perfect, you know, and then look like the dramatic girl that had something terribly wrong and then everything was perfect. So then, you know, the back pain, I mentioned that I had this weird pain through my shoulder blades. And it wasn't just my left side, it was both sides. The pain would kind of come back up, and I kept asking my husband about the heartburn. And like, do you have heartburn in your back? Maybe this is just, I've never had heartburn before, and I don't know what it feels like. And then also, I kind of would start getting, I describe it as when someone runs a marathon in the freezing cold, and some people know what I'm talking about, and some people act like I'm crazy, but this burning feeling when it's like freezing cold outside and you're trying to exercise, I would get this burning feeling up through my throat and jaw. So, I would get shortness of breath, even at rest. This pain through my shoulder blades. I would just want someone, I kept telling me, I was like, I just want someone to pull my shoulder blades apart. Like, it hurts. Like, and then the pain and burning through my throat. And it just progressively came on even when I wasn't even at rest. I don't know how y'all will edit that all. Right?
I was thinking about when you talked about walking up the hill in Oxford.
Yeah.
I don't know, Chris, if you want to add that. Do you remember
Are we getting close to February? I was trying to go in like kind of chronological order. Yeah, it was like 2 weeks before.
I just remember you talking about that experience and how horrible you couldn't even catch up.
Was that sort of the turning point when you said, I need to talk to somebody?
Around January, February. I would say January was when I really started getting worried.
Okay. So was that during the Oxford walk?
Oxford was February 5th during our anniversary.
Okay. So why don't you say...
But I mean, I remember instances where I was in our bathroom. I think I was putting up some clothes. And I remember just stopping dead in my tracks and being like, I'm breathing really rapidly. I'm out of breath. This cannot be normal. This cannot be normal. And I hate when I stumble my words. I remember thinking this cannot be normal. I think at that moment I picked up my phone and texted my mom and just said, Mom, I'm folding. No. I remember picking up my phone at that moment and texting my mom and telling her, you know, I'm putting up clothes and I literally cannot breathe. Like, this can't be normal. Callaway was not the most petite baby. She had lots of chunky rolls to love on, and I remember my mom and dad saying, maybe, you know, Callaway's a big baby, maybe you've pulled a muscle in your back. And so I think to everyone, no one would have thought, hold on, I don't know where this is going. We're not trying to get there yet.
What do you mean?
I mean, I'm like jumping forward, I feel like.
That's fine.
What were we just doing?
You were just talking about talking to your mom and the baby, and they thought that you maybe had pulled something. So did you want to talk about, at this point, when you decided that you needed to talk to somebody? Or what was next? Just go
I don't
from there.
know. I think that was the first time I ended up, I think as my symptoms progressively got worse, I started outwardly reaching out to people. I think it got more evident to me that something wasn't right, as much as I tried not to believe something was wrong. So I reached out to my mom. We kind of came to the conclusion that maybe I'd pulled something in my back or was just still recovering from having the baby. I think at that point, no one had any reason to believe there was something potentially life-threatening going on with my health. Life went on as normal. Of course, I was still having shortness of breath, still, the symptoms were still there, but I was coming up with other reasons as to why they were there. But the more I started reaching out, the more I think it really became apparent that I really needed to get some professional, that doesn't make sense. The more I started to kind of voice my symptoms and talk to, Ben, my mom, my dad, and my doctors, I realized that I really needed to probably get checked out. I remember there was a time we were up in Oxford for our anniversary, and we were walking to the square, and we were going up this really steep hill, and I remember Ben was pushing the stroller. I was really far back from him, and I could not breathe. The burning in my throat was coming back. I was going up the incline of the hill, and really got scared. I thought, I should be able to make it up a hill. I might have thought I was out of shape, but there's no way I can be this out of shape. I've never, I don't know.
You said it. Say it. Yeah. Okay.
But anyways, yes.
So did you check Google? I have a note about
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Shortly after our anniversary, we were going home to Birmingham. It was my sister's 30th birthday. We were going to have a big celebration. And all weekend long, I was complaining of the shortness of breath, the pain in my back, the burning in my throat. And, pulling a muscle came back up. Maybe you've hurt your back. Callaway's, holding Callaway could have strained your back. There's numerous things that could be wrong. Don't freak out just yet. I remember sitting at my sister's house and for the first time got on Dr. Google. I was going to self-diagnose myself. I was going to diagnose myself. And I typed in my symptoms, and it came up as what's a good way of phrasing that?
Everything led back to heart issues. Maybe
Yeah.
something like that. Everything led back.
I remember sitting at my sister's house and pulling up Google, which is one of the most dangerous things anybody can ever do. It's like, don't Google it. Don't, So anyways, I was determined that I was about to diagnose myself. So I typed in all my symptoms: burning in my throat, pain up my back and shoulder blades, and the shortness of breath. And everything led back to women's heart health issues. And that was the first time, I think, that I really realized something's wrong. I didn't know what it might be. I still don't think I quite thought I would have as major of a blockage as I did. But I remember looking at it and being like, golly, this might make a lot of sense. So then that night we were in Birmingham. We were going to we were celebrating my sister's birthday. We were going to, it's called what's it called, Ben?
Was it locked out? Was it an escape room?
Yeah.
Escape room.
Where y'all went for her birthday?
Yeah.
I think it was escape room, wasn't it?
That's what it's called here, but I don't think it matters. It just, that's not.
Yeah, that's what they're called everywhere. They just have different things.
Okay. So in my head, I've self-diagnosed what's going on. That night we were going to celebrate my sister's 30th birthday at one of the escape rooms in Birmingham. And we got to the escape room early for our time slot. So we decided to walk. It was in Homewood, in walking distance to a restaurant. So we were going to go and sit and have a drink before our time was called to go back and play. And everyone was, it was February. It was really cold outside. We were all kind of rushing to get to the restaurant and get out of the cold. And I remember looking back. I remember looking, and everyone was, strides ahead of me. And Ben being like, Abby, come on. I'm like, I'm out of breath. I can't breathe. I had to stop, literally stop in my tracks and just...
Take a rest.
And catch my breath.
Yeah. Everybody was, I looked ahead and everybody was strides ahead of me. And Ben turned back and said, Abby, come on, hurry up. We're trying, they're trying to get out of the cold. I can't breathe. I'm standing there being like, I've got to catch my breath and rest. Something is not right. And somehow, by the grace of God, I made it through the escape rooms. If you've played the escape rooms before, you know it's quite the adrenaline rush, and you're pretty ramped up trying to get out of a maze or whatever. It doesn't matter. The next day, and the burning. Okay, so I remember having to stop and catch my breath, and the burning in my throat was so bad. And that's when it really reminded me of the marathon run, because it was so cold outside. Anyways, that's stupid. Okay.
You're doing okay.
Yeah, this is sounding great.
Okay, and then I think the next day is when you talked to your parents, right? That was when you really had a conversation with your dad.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And you started talking about your family friend and all that.
Yeah, and you may just want to mention that your dad's a doctor too.
That's true. So the next morning after, we went out for my sister's birthday, we all went, so then, what was it, Valentine's? The next morning, after we went out to celebrate my sister's birthday, we all went to brunch in Birmingham before Ben and I left town. And I remember I got up from the brunch table to go make my plate and had to stop walking to the brunch. Hold on. That's not what I meant to say. Ben, did anything happen between then and brunch?
Between then and lunch?
Brunch.
Between the birthday party the night before and brunch.
No, I don't think so.
I kept mentioning it, but people, it was still like, you pulled a back muscle. It was still,
Did you talk to your parents that next morning about it?
at brunch.
Just when y'all were eating?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you could just say that the next day we went to brunch and I was still having these symptoms, and I decided to talk to my dad or someone.
And at that point, I decided it was time to have a serious conversation with my family about something. I felt like something was really wrong with my health. Like something was really going on. And at that point.
But I never mentioned the doctor.
That's okay. I think you
That's
just.
fine.
How do I go back and do that?
We talked. You mentioned talking to your doctors and reaching out.
Okay.
You mean your friend, the family friend?
No, this was about that we were going to tie in the OB and
Yeah,
reaching
I don't
out.
think that's very significant.
Okay. The next morning before we were to head back to Jackson, we all went to lunch and as a family. And I remember just thinking back on how I felt the night before and what I had read on Google, that I really needed to sit down and have a serious conversation with my mom and dad. And at that point at lunch, I think I got up to go make my plate and had to stop and catch my breath again, just from the table to the brunch line. And I sat back down after making my plate and said, Mom, I really am scared something's not right. This has been going on for way too long. I just had to stop, headed to the brunch line to catch my breath. I felt horrible last night. Everyone was strides ahead of me and I couldn't keep up walking. There just has to be more to this than we're thinking. And my dad, who's a doctor, how do I say that?
I think that you just said it. That he's a doctor. How do you say what?
I think just like you just did. Dad is a doctor, or just say I talked to my dad, who's also a doctor, and I just told him my symptoms.
I also looked at my dad, who's a doctor, and really decided at that point that we might need to reach out to our family friend who's a cardiac. Is he a cardiac surgeon? Okay. When I sat back down at the table after having to stop and catch my breath when I was on my way to the brunch line, I decided it was time to really sit down with my mom and dad. Dad's a doctor. Figured he... Oh my God. When I sat back down at the table after having to stop on the way to the brunch line to catch my breath, I decided it was really time to have a serious conversation with my mom and dad. I knew that things weren't right. I had felt horrible the night before. At this point, there was more to it than what we were thinking. At that point, I think I knew there was more going on with my body than any of us were leading to believe. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And you already said it perfectly before. So
Okay. Okay. We have some... Okay, where do I go from there?
I think you say, my dad's a doctor in Birmingham. One of his best friends is a cardiac surgeon, and so I asked him if he'd reach out to him for me.
At that point, when I was talking to my mom and dad, Dad is a doctor in Birmingham. One of his best friends is a cardiac surgeon. And at that point, I think is when I asked if we should maybe call and just see what Dr. Richardson thought about my symptoms and if it was worth maybe getting it looked into. Still kind of hesitant doing that because I wanted to believe nothing was wrong. But I remember getting in the car, headed out to Jackson, and the symptoms started with me just sitting in the passenger seat. And I remember picking up my phone in the car. I didn't even tell Ben. And I texted Dr. Richardson's wife, and I just said, I know it's a Sunday. I hate to bother Dr. Richardson on his day off, but something is not right with me, and if he has a minute, please get him to call me. And he called me shortly later. He then
call?
Not long after Dr. Richardson called me, I started explaining what was happening, and he suggested that I needed to get in with the doctor in Jackson right away. He said whenever he hears from a young woman that just had a baby with any type of heart symptoms, that it's always best to get it checked out. At that point, I don't think any of us still thought something was majorly wrong, but it was going to be better to be safe than sorry. So that's when kind of the calls started. What am I trying to say? To get into the doctor. I don't know.
That's fine.
You went the next day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just say I think you could just say he had a friend that was a cardiologist in Jackson. He made a call for me, and I was scheduled to see him first thing Monday morning. I think you can. At that point, I don't think you need to say the doctor's name or anything. I think just say he had a friend in Jackson who was a cardiologist and made a call for me to see him first thing the next day.
Luckily, Dr. Richardson had a connection in Jackson. We made a few calls, and I was literally about to be so frustrated with myself.
That's fine.
Um,
I was in the doctor's office the next day.
okay. Luckily, Dr. Richardson had a connection in Jackson with a cardiologist, and I found myself in their office the next morning. Yeah, but it was kind of sarcastic at the end. I'll redo it because that was stupid. Luckily, Dr. Richardson had a connection with a cardiologist in Jackson, and I found myself sitting in his waiting room the next morning.
Perfect. Okay. So let's just talk about what happened.
I remember walking into the cardiologist's office that morning and thinking, what in the world am I doing here? I'm the youngest. Is that bad to say that I'm like young amongst all these old people? How do I say that intelligently?
No, you
Just
say.
say I'm one of the youngest people in the waiting room.
Yeah.
I remember walking into Jackson Hart and noticing that I was the youngest person in there and thinking, this can't be real. Like, why am I here? Like, I've never had any health issues, and now I'm sitting in a cardiologist's office. Yeah. Just cut that off right there.
Okay. So what test did you have?
So then I remember Ben and I were waiting in the room for the doctor to come in, and there was a pamphlet on the back of the door that, is it angina? How do y'all say it? Angina. Okay. I remember Ben and I sitting in the room waiting on the doctor to come in. And on the back of the door there were pamphlets for angina. How do you say it? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Angina.
You can really say it either way.
Yeah, I think either way is fine.
You say it however you normally say it so you don't get freaked out. I really think you can say it either way.
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Okay. I remember Ben and I were sitting in the room waiting for the doctor to come in. On the back of the door were pamphlets you could tear off. And I looked at Ben and I said, Ben, those are the symptoms I'm having. And it was for angina, which are classic heart attack symptoms. And I tore one off, put it beside me, and kind of thought, well, that's interesting, but that can't be me. That's not going to be my issue. But
Doing good.
That was good.
So to do now, I say Dr. Hayes.
Yeah, you can.
You can, yeah.
Okay.
Because he's going to be in it.
My cardiologist, Dr. Hayes, walked in. And I remember him starting to do all the tests he would typically do to
What are you trying to say?
how do I need to go into like him? I mean, I guess I'm going into what he did to try and start figuring out what's wrong.
I would just say that Dr. Hayes, did an EKG and echo and whatever else he did, which is routine for any heart problem.
Right.
But Neil, tell me this, and I don't know if this is right or not. Is the CT, was that normal practice, or was that something extra he kind of did? Did I make that
He
up?
kind of said that he was going to throw out. He was going to throw out.
He said he's gonna cast a wide net.
He was going to cast.
85 to 90% of the bats.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said he's going to throw out a fishing net to eliminate the bad stuff.
Yeah.
He said it first.
So I remember the moment Dr. Hayes walked in, he looked at us and he said, "Don't freak out just yet. I'm going to throw out a really wide fishing net and we're going to eliminate 90% of the bad stuff." So he started to do his routine test, which he does on any patient that might have potential heart issues. The EKG, took my blood pressure, checked me.
You did an EKG and echo blood test and a CT with contrast.
Yeah. He did he started out doing the EKG, took my blood pressure, listened to my heart. All of those things were completely normal. He took it a step further at that point and decided that he was going to do a CT angiogram. Was that what it is?
Yep.
He took it a step further and decided at that point, knowing the symptoms I was having, that he was going to do a CT with contrast the next day, a CT angiogram. I left there thinking, this is silly. Nothing's wrong. That's not right to say.
Yeah, I mean, what you said initially is that you left thinking that the doctor was going to call you and say it's nothing.
Right. Okay. I remember Dr. Hayes walking in the room and looking at both of us and telling us, "Relax, don't freak out just yet. I'm going to throw out a really wide fishing net and we're going to try and eliminate 90% of the bad stuff and we'll go from there." He started his routine test that he would do on any patient that has potential heart issues. He did the EKG and the heart. He did the EKG, my blood pressure, listened to my heart, and all of those things checked out completely normal. So he decided to take it a step further with the symptoms I was having, and he decided that the next day I would come in for a CT with contrast, a CT angiogram, and go from there. I left the doctor, knowing that all the other tests had checked out normal, and I just knew that I would get a call saying everything's perfectly fine, and I was going to have to hear it from my mom and dad that I pulled a back muscle, they also were going to do an echo the next day.
I think that's fine that you didn't mention that. Unless you just want to go back and do it. But I think it's fine.
Yeah, I will, because he called me with the echo and the CT results at the same time.
Okay.
One was...
And blood work.
And blood work. Okay.
Also, you know what? I love, you said it one time, you may have already gotten it, but when you said, I left there thinking, oh, once again, I was just being dramatic and everything was fine.
Yeah.
I feel like you said that earlier, and I thought you make it it sounded
Yeah.
good.
Okay. So I'll start back when he walked in the room, because that's just what I've been doing. I remember Dr. Hayes walking in the room and looking at both of us and assuring us that everything was going to be fine. There was no need to freak out just yet. He was going to, in his terms, throw out a big fishing net and eliminate 90% of the bad stuff, and we were going to go from there. He started to do his routine test that he does on any of his patients that could have potential heart issues. He started with the EKG. He did some blood work. checked my blood pressure, listened to my heart, and all those things checked out completely normal. And at that point, with the symptoms I was having, with the pain at my shoulder blades, shortness of breath, and the burning in my throat, and have just having had a baby, he decided to take it a step further. And he ordered an echo and a CT with contrast for the next day. I remember leaving the office thinking, it's going to be another one of those instances where they're going to call, say everything's completely normal, and I'm back at thinking I was dramatic. No. I remember leaving the office and thinking, I'm going to get the call that everything's completely normal. I'm perfectly fine, which will be a huge blessing, but I'm going to feel like I'm dramatic. Once again, I've gone to the doctor, cried wolf, and nothing's wrong.
I like it.
That was good. Oh, that was good. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Am I like, but I'm portraying myself as like I'm a hypochondriac. You know, that's what it came across like.
But just because you said it earlier, like,
Okay.
it kind of ties it together. Because, I mean,
Yeah.
I think, here's the deal. This is why I say that, because women say that all the time.
Yeah, it's the most
Well, I
common
should have
thing.
said like my fear of being the dramatic. I remember leaving the doctor's office that day, and since most of the tests had come back normal, I remember looking at Ben saying, he's gonna call us and everything's gonna be completely normal, and my fear of being the dramatic female that cried wolf is gonna come true and nothing's gonna be wrong. Whatever y'all want to use.
I think that's good. He'll fix it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Whatever. I just don't want to look like I like am a high, like
Here's a
this has
perspective.
happened before.
Here's a perspective. We've been talking for like an hour, and we're going to use maybe
I know.
3 minutes.
I know.
of this.
I know.
Very important.
So, yeah.
Okay, so was it the next day that he called you?
No, it was that day.
That day, I thought.
We went and had the test done the next day.
The next day, yeah.
Okay, so this is good.
It was too late in the day that Monday to get the echo and CT done, so I had to come back that next morning. And I remember being in the lab getting ready to do the CTA, and the first kind of sign I got that something wasn't right, and I feared that I might get some bad results, was when the tech was getting me ready, and he was doing my heart rate, and he looked up at me and he said, "Did you have an irregular heart rate?" Sorry. The tech looked up to, why? What in the world?
Just say the tech look at me.
I remember the tech getting me ready to do the CTA and checking my heart rate and looking up at me being like, did they notice anything wrong with your heart rate yesterday? I was like, no, it was completely normal. You know, he was like, you're just having a little bit of an irregular heartbeat. I was like, well, that's interesting. And in my mind, I think that was the first moment I thought I could be getting some bad results here soon. That was really the first instance where something they had done, some test they had done, showed any abnormal pattern. That makes sense? Okay. So we got done with the echo and the CTA, and I was not home for more than 20 minutes before my phone rang. And in my family, we usually go by the saying, no news is good news. And when a doctor calls you 20 minutes after you've taken a test, it was a red flag. I was like, this is way too soon for Dr. Hayes to be calling me. I've barely made it home. And I was by myself. I answered the phone, and I heard his voice. He said, I had just gotten home, I was alone, and my phone rang, and no. I know. That's why I'm like, why did I re-say that?
You're fine.
I remember answering the phone and hearing his voice and knowing something wasn't right. It was that moment of just, my heart sank. He said, Abby, is this a good time to talk? I'm like, sure, lay it on out there, because I knew something wasn't right. And he said, everything we did yesterday was completely fine. No. Where can I start over from that point?
You can just start right there and keep going.
Everything we did yesterday was fine.
When I answered he said, Abby, everything we did yesterday, all the tests we took. Abby, everything we did yesterday checked out completely normal. We saw, I need to just, hold on. This should not be that difficult.
Do you need to take a break?
Maybe.
Okay, we'll do that.
You want some water? You have some water.
Take a break.
We're recording.
Okay. I was not home for more than 20 minutes before my phone rang, and I noticed it was a number from St. Dominic's. In our family, we usually go by the motto, no news is good news. So when a doctor's calling you 20 minutes after the test was taken, I took that as kind of a red flag and cautiously answered the phone. And I could hear in Dr. Hayes' voice something wasn't quite right. He told me that, all the tests yesterday checked out perfectly normal. The echo that morning looked perfectly fine. Hold on, that's not. He started off by saying that all the tests he ran the previous day had checked out completely normal. The echo they had taken right before the CTA looked to be good. He said, but something doesn't look right on the CTA. And my heart just immediately fell to the floor. It's a call you never want to get, but it's a call you especially don't want to get when your newborn child is in the next room and depends on you. And I remember saying, what do you mean something doesn't look right on the CTA? And he said, we see something in your left main artery. It's called your left anterior descending artery, your LAD. And that term immediately rang home to me. When I was a senior in high school, my dad had a major heart attack, and it was in his LAD. Hold on. Trying to think how I can say this. And then say that, okay. Right when he said the left anterior descending, I immediately knew, okay, this isn't good. It rang home to me because when I was a senior in high school, my dad had a major heart attack in that very same place. All I could think of is widowmaker. That's the term they commonly use for that artery. He said something doesn't quite look right, but, sometimes things can look weird on a CTA and they turn out completely fine. So we just need to get you back up here and get you into the heart cath. We need to get you back up here and get you into the cath lab as soon as possible. I'm in here right now. Hold on. sometimes, he said sometimes things can look one way on a CTA and turn out completely fine when they go in the cath lab. And he just said, don't freak out just yet. We're going to get you back up here as soon as possible and do the cath on you and see if anything at that point looks wrong. And I remember just thinking, if something's wrong, nothing can be wrong. I've got a child I've got to take care of, brain block.
Keep going with that. Just that whole, you were by yourself, Ben was not here.
I know. I guess y'all can edit it. I'm just going to start from,
Do that.
When he assured me that sometimes things can look one way on the CTA and another way when they get in there in the cath lab. And he just said, stay calm, don't freak out just yet. But we need to get you back up here for a heart cath as soon as possible. I'm up here right now, actually. And so if y'all can make it back up here, we can do it within the next few hours. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm in a dream. This can't be real. I was home alone with the baby and just got a phone call I would have never dreamed I would ever get in my life. I remember him saying, here's my number, talk to your husband, see if y'all can get back up here, and we'll get this taken care of as soon as possible. I hung up, and I remember trying to call Ben a few times, and he wasn't answering, and I texted him. I was like, you really need to call me. Call me back, please, as soon as possible. And he called, and I think both of us, I don't think he was expecting me to give him the news. Okay, where am I going? Someone help me out here.
I think that's fine. You just say he rushed home. Because that's what you said initially.
When I got in touch with Ben, the decision was made that he was going to come home and get me immediately, and we're going to head up there. It all seemed like a dream at the time. I remember my sister-in-law came over to give me something right after my sister-in-law came by to give me something right after I'd gotten the phone call. And I remember her looking at me and saying, you're going to be okay. And I said, I have to be okay. I've got, Callaway is depending on me. Everything is going to be okay. It's kind of a flashback of walking into the waiting room and feeling like you're the youngest person in there, but walking into a cath lab, I'll never forget the nurses pulling back the curtain to the little pre-op room I was in, and them saying, what are you doing in here? They weren't expecting to see a 27-year-old female sitting there waiting to go back to the heart cath. Hold on. I have to figure out where to go from here.
So you go into the cath lab and they take you back, and do they put you under, and then they decided to do the stent? Is that how it worked? Or did you know, you weren't asleep, you told me that.
Yeah, so they take you back to a holding area before you go back to the actual cath lab, where they get you ready. I remember having another moment of like, why in the world am I back here? I'm the youngest again. I'm not the typical patient they see back there. I remember the nurses, coming in to get my IV started, and I remember one of them saying, "What are you doing back here? surely nothing's wrong. And just remember thinking, I don't know why I'm back here. You know, like, I'm just as shocked as you are. Why am I back here? From that point, I remember them taking me back to the cath lab and having to say bye to Ben. And remembering at that moment that things could be drastically different when I get back. In the cath lab, they don't put you all the way under. You're semi-awake. And I remember the moment that I heard, well, the plan was that when they got in there and they saw, if anything was wrong, they were going to call Ben and let him know, and decisions would be made from there. And I remember them having to make the call to Ben, and knowing that at that point, something was wrong. Something was really wrong. And the nurse practitioner ended up bringing Ben in there to see the picture. And it's one of those moments you'll never forget. But also kind of luckily being out of it to where at that point, I don't know where I'm going with that.
You couldn't feel the full weight of it.
Yeah, at that point, I knew something was wrong, but luckily I was under a little bit of anesthesia that,
That's fine.
I think that's the part where you said, I remember you saying, and this like hit me hard, that all you could do was hear what they were saying, and you heard him say the words, I think you said you heard him say the words, 90% blockage and a stent, and all you could think of at that point was, oh my gosh, my life's about to be completely different. I mean, I remember you saying, like, that was so impactful to me, that you were half asleep, but yet you heard those words when he was talking to Ben.
In the cath lab, they don't put you completely to sleep. You're conscious, you're aware. I remember being able to hear them, but I can't really visually, I remember being able to hear them, but not really being awake to be aware of everything going on around me. And I remember Ben coming back into the cath lab and Dr. Hayes showing him the picture, and I just remember the words, 90% blockage and stent. And from that point forward, I was like, I don't like that. I remember the point to which the nurse went and got Ben and brought him back into the cath lab to show him the pictures that they had taken of my LAD. And I remember them saying that it's 90% blocked and we're going to have to place a stent. And I remember thinking, my life, I remember thinking from this point forward, my life is changing. But not really being able to feel the whole weight of the situation.
I think that's fine. We can stop it changing. What you said when you told us is that stents aren't for 20-year-olds. How is this happening? Life is changing. A heart attack is imminent. Those are some of the notes that I wrote down.
Yeah, that's the next morning. I remember.
Question real quick. Did Clay, when you asked him, you texted him, did he tell you what percentage she said?
Well, I said 90% blocked. I said everything out, and he said, yes, that's right.
Okay.
Or should I say 80 to, wasn't it first?
You said 80 and then John Richardson told you it would be 90 in an operating room.
Yeah, I think 80 to 90. Maybe I should just say 80 to 90 in
I
case.
just want him to say something different than what you said.
I know, that's why I asked him, because now
I think
he,
we'll just tell him you said 90. I think if it's close, but he's not gonna. I don't think you have to get too technical with it.
well, let me just say it over in case, because that's the first time I've said the actual percentage. Because at one point before, he said it was 80 to 90% blocked, and then John Richardson said 90, and so it's like,
Yeah.
okay. So how do I don't need to phrase being like semi-conscious better. I didn't like that.
They call it a twilight. That's what they call it.
Twilight
Like
anesthesia.
twilight is what that's when the term they use when they use that type of anesthesia is you're like in a twilight. Like you can hear but you don't really know what's going on.
Okay.
You're not fully aware but you can hear people talking.
I remember before being taken back to the cath lab, us discussing with Dr. Hayes that if something was seen on the cath, that they would immediately call Ben and discuss with him the options and go from there. When you go back for a heart cath, they don't put you completely under. You're in kind of a twilight anesthesia type. When you go back for a heart cath, they don't put you completely under. You're semi-aware, kind of sleepy, but you're not knocked out. And I remember the nurse bringing in Ben. Well, actually, no. I remember the phone call being made to Ben. And at that point knowing if he's having to call Ben, something's not right. And then I heard the words, we see an 80 to 90% blockage in our LAD and we're going to need to place a stent. And being semi-aware but not being able to really know what was going on around me, my only thought was, from this point forward, life's different. That's it.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's fine. You're doing good. So that happens, and how do you feel after you are conscious or the next day or whatever? What's going through your mind?
I remember that night being up in the hospital, and I think it still wasn't really reality yet. I think I was still kind of loopy from all the medicines. And they brought Callaway up to see me, and things kind of went on as normal that night. I was in a frame of complete denial. But I remember waking up the next morning really early, and it all hit me. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Ben was asleep on what they call a bed in the hospital, the chair, and he woke up to me just sobbing, crying, and he was like, "What's wrong? Do you not feel good?" And I was like, "What just happened?" I think the gravity of the situation at that point hit me, and I said, how is this all happening? How am I sitting here with a stent, 27 years old? I've never had a health issue in my life, and I'm now on the heart floor of St. Dominic's. It just all didn't make sense. And I think at that point I knew that life for me, life for my husband, life for my future children in Callaway would be different. There's a better way of saying that.
What's changed? What about just what's changed?
Girls in their hair.
But what-
I think at that point it hit me that life as we knew it, life for me, life for my husband, life for Callaway and our future children would be different. And I didn't really know how to come to terms with it at that point.
Okay. Okay, so let's just move on from there. And just talk a little bit about how you talked a little bit about how things have changed. You have to get a checkup every year, or we just need to kind of move on with it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense?
I think in the interview,
You talked a little bit about your rehab. I mentioned that in the letter, you know, that you had a couple months of rehab, and then I think you move on to today, you know, how you're feeling today.
And we need to talk about, I'll guide you with the Heart Association stuff.
okay.
Yeah.
What?
I was saying, you had late night ER scares and.
You know, from that point forward, life moves on. Of course, life's different. You have a few extra things to worry about. I was placed on, a really strong blood thinner to help with the drug-eluting stent. Was told I needed to be on that for a year. I'll never forget the bruises that ensued from the Berlinta. That makes...
It's fine.
How do you say you're kind of paranoid after that? Or you're on alert. How do I say that?
Sensitive, maybe?
Or you could say, I had gone so long with ignoring the problems.
That now I was hyper aware.
Yeah.
I think, the months after having the stent placed and trying to get life back to normal, I had gone so many months after having Callaway ignoring the symptoms that now I found myself hyper aware. There were times where I'd be laying in bed and feel a little bit of the same symptom, have my daughter sleeping in the room next to us and being scared to go to sleep because you think something's wrong with you. And had a couple of late night ER calls to make sure everything was okay. Because now knowing that something could potentially be wrong with your heart is nothing you want to go to sleep to. Your life I went from ignoring symptoms to being completely hyper aware, and now live my life kind of with a listen to your body type mentality. My body for many months was telling me what was wrong, and as a woman I was ignoring it. I think a lot of women do that way too often, and blah.
No, that's perfect.
I think that's good. And I think you telling your story to others, that was one of your points you wanted to make. Like, telling other people your stories that hopefully this doesn't happen to somebody else, I know you talked about that some. You want to tie that in there.
What else? I remember my first checkup after my stent was when I got the news that I would have to, my first checkup after the stent was placed was when I got the news that they recommended I go do the Ornish Cardiac Rehab Program up at St. Dominic's. And it's a pretty intense program. It's twice a week for 9 weeks. for 4 to 5 hours a day. And thinking, but this was a one-time deal. You know, like, I'm not the picture of heart disease. This is a fluke thing. No one knows why it happened. Why do I need to go to this cardiac rehab program? And I walked in for the first time and came home after... I'm looking over there. I remember, I know it was something at the time that I needed to do, but it's not something I necessarily wanted to do. I didn't want to remind myself of what had happened. I didn't want to face the reality of what had happened, but I knew it was something that I had to do. I knew that, you know, I needed to get the confidence back that I was going to be okay, and I knew that rehab would do that. But I remember coming home the first day and just falling on the floor in tears, being like, I cannot go back. I can't go back. This is not, I'm not supposed to be there. I haven't had a bypass. I didn't have a heart attack. Okay. I don't know, y'all. This is...
It's fine.
That's enough on that part.
Yeah. Can you tell us just a little bit about what you think the impact of the research that the American Heart Association has had on you? Or just talk about the American Heart
Or do you need
Association.
us to tell you that?
Yeah.
You need us to tell you the impact the Heart Association had on you?
Yes, to be
Well, I
honest.
think he can talk about, you know, I think he can say, I now know
Yeah.
that, you know,
I now know that because of the research of the American Heart Association, that the treatment that I received was something like that.
Where did I put my phone? Because when I left that meeting, is my phone
it's right
underneath
here.
here? I left and I wrote down like a tagline that,
You liked.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to step in here for just a second, okay?
I think for months after all this happened, I spent a lot of time, I think the months after all this happened, I spent a ton of time wondering why. Why did this happen? We really couldn't pinpoint one particular reason or the other. I didn't have any of the typical heart attack risk. I didn't have any of the typical heart disease risk factors. I was in relatively good health. But I wanted to know why. I wanted to know what caused this.
I think at that point you can say something to the effect of, you know, because there's not a lot of research right this minute about what happened to you. Because I've looked and looked and looked,
Yeah.
and there's not. And just say, you know, my hope for the future, I think that's where this is where you can say that. My hope for the future is that the American Heart Association will have research that will help me figure out why this happened to me. You know, because that is true. I mean, we hope in the future that we will be able to fund research to figure it out. I mean, there may be one day that there's something that comes about that we can find out the why.
Yeah.
But we don't know it right now. But that right there is a reason for funding to be raised,
Yeah.
so that we can continue to do research. There's just not a lot of research on women and pregnancy right this minute. There's a little bit, but your situation's very unique.
I think the question I get asked most often is, why did this happen? Have they given you a reason why this has happened? Will this happen again? And for a while it bothered me that I didn't have an answer. The doctors can't really pinpoint a reason. It was one of those things that surprised everybody. I wasn't your typical heart patient. I didn't have any heart disease risk factors. My cholesterol was normal. So why did this happen? We don't know. But my hope is that in the future, the money raised through the American Heart Association can help fund research to one day maybe I can figure out why and help other women.
That was good.
Mhm.
I thought that was really
Yeah.
good.
And help other women live healthier lives, or you can also talk about your daughter.
Yeah, yeah.
I know.
And for her future, you know, I want answers so that, you know, when she's
I don't,
older-
at this point, I don't necessarily want the answers for my comfort. I want the answers for my daughter's future. You know, now that I've had this happen at such an early age, it puts her at risk for heart disease at an early age. So my hope is that in the future, the funding raised through the American Heart Association can help find those answers so that Callaway can live a life
free from heart disease.
Yeah. So that Callaway can live a life free of the worry of the potential threat of heart disease.
That's good.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that got exactly me.
Yeah.
Because that's your why right there. I mean, that's why you're doing this.
Sorry.
Really, it's everything, the EKG, the echo, all that was due to
Even when you
research.
Google the symptoms, I mean, it probably took you to the American Heart Association website. You know, I mean, it's all of that. It's from the beginning to...
Yeah, that's true. So how do y'all want to word all that? I mean, from the very beginning of when I started reaching out to figure out what was wrong with me from Google sent me to the American Heart Association page that gave me my first tip off that something might be wrong. Okay, keep going. Where do I go from there?
And I've since learned that all the tests and even the stent that was placed in me was due to research of the American Heart Association.
Since then, I've been made aware that even the tests that were run that very first day that I walked into the doctor's office, the EKG, the blood tests, the echo, the CTA, even up until the stent was placed, was all
Due to research from the American Heart Association.
even up until the stent was placed, was all due to the research of the American Heart Association.
Perfect. That's
Yeah.
perfect. That's the hardest part because that's not your story.
Yeah.
I know, but I don't know. One of the main things I now think about is that I can't live my life in fear. I can't live my life in fear of what happens next, if this will happen again, but I can live it with awareness and be proactive. That's not what I like have it written out. That is what I want to say.
Okay, we'll read it
Why don't you
a couple
read it?
times. And then you can get it in pieces.
Or you could read it. Why don't you read it and we'll get a photo, because we want to get some photos as well, and do it as a voiceover.
Oh, yeah,
And show a photo.
We won't see you.
Well, I think one of the main things, if I had to sit here and if I had one message to convey, it would be that you can't live your life in fear, but you can live it with awareness and initiative, to be proactive with your health, to listen to your body, and to not be afraid to reach out, because sometimes, it can mean life or death. And for me, hearing the words that I was on the verge of having an imminent heart attack is one of the scariest things to hear. And to think that I was ignoring the symptoms because I was afraid of being wrong or being dramatic, or being told nothing was, wrong with me.
It's really scary.
Is terrifying.
That's perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, so
Ben now? Or no? Give her a little breaky break.